Shalom and good day all. This is Tehillim29 back again for another DC comic review. And in this DC comic review from Rainbow Press and Comics, I will be reviewing Detective Comics issue 140 by Tamaki and issue 1033 by Johnson. Correct that is 1040 on the Detective Comics Batman. So, time to get started in the review for Detective Comics Batman and Action Comics Superman. Starting off with Detective Comics Batman, for our review, as you know, I do like to rate certain things in relation to the stories. Now, does this story in any way, shape or form, starting off with the cover, or does this cover in any way, shape or form work in relation to what happens in the story? Surprisingly, it really does. And it does actually connect to something that does happen within the story. But you know what? He's in there. He's behind bars less time than what Matt Murdock Daredevil is in the Daredevil run. And yes. And I think that really worked well for the story. So what did I give the cover art? Because this actually worked really well with the story. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Now it's the time to move into the internal art, which I'll show you some of the art around the beginning, middle, and also the end. I also need to point out that I will not be covering the backstories in relation to these titles. So I'm only covering the main title, or the main story title. So time to begin. Now this is some of the art in the beginning of the story. And as you can see, Bruce Wayne has actually entered into the cell. On the following page, we have Barbara Gordon, who is our Oracle, also speaking to one of the doctors in regards to the hospital. And something that is also brought up in relation to Helena. Who is also known as Huntress. Now, something a little bit around the middle of the story. As we can see, we've got the return of the Penguin. And if you happen to read this book, you'll see that he also is catching up with some other Gotham villains. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, unless you already know the spoilers of those who have already shared it out on their channels. But what's happening with the Penguin here? It feels like he's about to set a bounty on the Bat. As we return to the next page, Bruce Wayne still in prison, talking to one of the people there. And the art is pretty much consistent throughout this issue and this story. Now some art towards the end. Of course, with the art towards the end, we've got Mr. Worth. If you remember, to those who have been following the story around Mr. Worth, in this latest arc, something happened to his daughter. He pretty much got fierce and PO'd at Batman, or blamed Batman for the death of his daughter. Hey, he can't save everyone, but he can save those who he can save. But trust me, he'd love to save everyone. And of course, he's in discussions with the Penguin. And I really like what's being done with the art here. And also, something has also been attacked. We don't exactly know yet. So, for the art in this issue, I gave it a 7.5 7.5 out of 10. I'll repeat that again. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10 for the art. Now, what about the story? As you know, there are certain elements in my storytelling that I really enjoy. Or in other words, they stand out when they are done correctly. So, moving off with one of the easiest things, or something that should be one of the easiest things, is are there any references to any of the previous comics? Surprisingly, there was a reference to issue 170, to which, if I remember, 170 helps to begin the story arc of what we're in now. Jumping into time. Now, this is the only thing that Tamaki seems to be neglecting in the storytelling. And it really wouldn't hurt to include it in the storytelling. Even though it made no appearance in the storytelling, it would be nice to know, like, what time certain events are occurring within Gotham City. Moving on to the next one, which is location. Now, what are some of the locations that we travel to in this story? Number one is the GCPD Midtown Precinct, which was really good. We also went to the Gotham City Shipyard, which is actually towards the end of the story. And of course, around the middle of the story, we got to visit the Iceberg Lounge. The cast of characters, of course, Batman, who we also saw as Bruce Wayne, in that very minimal time in the jail cell, talking to one of the victims, I believe. So it's like Bruce is taking a different approach of reaching someone who was a victim of someone, which is interesting. Of course, we saw Oracle, Barbara Gordon. She was talking to Jennifer about Helena. We saw a very brief image of Helena. That was about all. We also saw the appearance of the Penguin and, of course, Mr. Worth. Overall, for this story, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now it's time to move on to Superman, issue 1033. So, as we begin our review for issue 1033 of Action Comics Superman, does this cover in any way, shape or form connect to something that's happening inside the story? Surprisingly, it does, and as much as I do like the cover, it really did bring out sort of like the best part in regards to Superman and his appearance. And it's also nice to see Lois there. It's only missing John Samuel Kent though. But we do actually get to see someone who is presently connected to Warworld, who is also believed to be a Kryptonian. Believed to be. For the art, or for the cover, I gave this story 7.5 out of 10. Now it's time to move into the internal art, and we'll get to have a look there. Now, this is some of the art around the beginning of the story, and as you can see, we are presently in the area of Atlantis. I'll now move to parts in the middle of the story. And this is the middle of the story, to which we can see Lois Lane speaking to Tao La, as well as the appearance of Mongol on Warworld. So we've got two locations here, the Fortress of Solitude as well as Warworld. Time to move towards the end of the story. And as we move towards the end of the story, we see something is actually happening to the slave that was on Warworld, which is now on planet Earth. And I must admit, this character right here really reminds me, just in facial features, what the early appearance of Goro looked like in Malibu Comics, in the Mortal Kombat comics that came out, which were in the 90s. And that's one of the first things that really grabbed my attention with this particular supporting character, Under Mongol. But it's also nice to see we do get the appearance of Lois Lane coming in to help Taular with a weapon. So, for the art rating, I gave it pretty much the same as the cover rating. So, time to move on to the fun part. What about the story rating? As you know, there are things in my story writing that I personally enjoy seeing. References, none at all. When there could have been, and perhaps should have been, time as to when some of these events are taking place, it would have helped to know, like even if it was pointing out the time of events happening on World before they were sent in to discipline one of their slaves. It would be nice to see that. Alright, this is sort of like the only two areas where this storytelling is falling. I was nearly going to say felling, but that normally happens to trees. Okay, what about locations? Even though the locations weren't clear, you were able to make it out in the story and in the graphics, or in the pictures that were provided for you. Of course, we got to see Atlantis, Warworld, Earth. We, of course, got the Fortress of Solitude, as well as the Hall of Justice. The cast being consistent of Superman, Lois, Taular, oh my goodness, the Justice League. That was another one that made an appearance in here. And two more characters which I really need to improve my writing on. Yes, we saw Superboy and some other members of the Super family, which was really nice, which had to do in regards to a situation starting to unfold in the seas between Atlantis and the US. For the overall story rating, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Personally, I wanted it to be higher if it had more of these elements, but it really lost it this time around. But 7 is okay. Well, until then, let's keep it colourful and have yourself an awesome day. If you're really enjoying the content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I'm on my way to 205 plus subscribers, and I can't do this without you. Plus, if you really enjoy comics or a certain medium, whether it's TV series, anime, you name it, and you feel the need to share it on a channel, go ahead, do it. Whether you choose to use YouTube, which is one medium, there are other mediums out there too. Let your voice be heard. Until then, let's keep it colourful and have yourself an awesome day.